Hi everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and my guest today is John Perks. John, by any account, is living a remarkable life. He was born in England between the two world wars, and he came to America as a teenager. Many adventures later, including establishing a school for juvenile delinquents in New York, John went on to serve as personal assistant, butler, and/or attendant to such people as Trungpa Rinpoche, John Rockefeller, and Bill Cosby, among others. In the late 80s, John established a new lineage of Celtic Buddhism, and he's going to talk about all these things with us today. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you.
You were born between the two wars, and I know your dad served in World War I.
Yes.
And you spent a lot of time in, actually, south of London in the country?
Yeah, a village called Sidcup.
Mm-hmm.
It's now actually part of London because it's 12 miles. Mm. But in those days, there were people in the village who had never been to London.
Wow.
And never been, far out of Sidcup itself,
Yes.
maybe to Chislehurst, which was 5 miles away.
That long ago, was that different? Yeah.
Yeah, and we had horses and carts and
You did.
all that kind of stuff. It was like something out of, Gosford Park.
Oh, right.
Or the other one.
Or Downton Abbey.
Downton Abbey,
That's right,
yeah.
it was around the same time.
Yeah.
Right, so you're making the transition to the
Sure.
motor age.
Sure. It was very separated in the class system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you very rarely had a conversation with somebody who was upper class. You would just say, yes, sir, or yes, mom.
Uh-huh, so
like
you wouldn't
that.
mix.
No. Never mix the classes.
Your mother was an herbalist and a Wiccan, is that right?
Well, we didn't use the term Wiccan.
Yeah.
It was a spiritualist.
Uh-huh.
She was a spiritualist, which meant she was a healer, and she was clairvoyant, and she did seances.
How did that affect you?
Well, my mother was my teacher, actually. Mm-hmm. And she was also made money as a house cleaner, house maid, And she would scrub the floor with a bucket and a scrub brush. And I would ride on her back.
Oh, wow.
And she would draw pictures in the soap and tell me stories about things,
That's kind of lovely.
Yeah, it was great.
And did you pick up a lot of her wisdom from being able to work with nature and work with people that way?
Sure, yes, I did. And she would take me to seances. And it was a traditional one where you put hands on the table, and that kind of thing. And
People knocking on the
is
table.
there anybody there? One knock for yes and 2 knocks for no.
Wow. Can you remember what that felt like as a kid?
Well, I was pretty scared. Sometimes I was scared.
Yeah.
Because Mother would say, "Do you see somebody sitting on the trunk over there?" And I wasn't sure that I wanted to see.
That's right.
Anything.
Right. Yeah.
So it was a little bit intimidating.
Yeah, I can see that. Your dad was a musician.
He was a musician, and he was in World War I because he was born in 1888. And he went into the army when he was 14.
Wow.
So he was a drummer boy, and then he was a bugle boy, and then he was in the band. So when the war came, all the bandsmen were stretcher bearers. He was completely, shell-shocked.
Really?
And wasn't in good shape.
And when he was teaching, he had and this was a school for orphans, is that right?
Yeah, it was the school near London. And 2 of his students were Sydney and Charles Chaplin. And he taught them the clarinet and the violin. And he had a saxophone that they had inscribed to him.
They did.
Which they sent from America, from Hollywood. Yeah.
After they got famous?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sweet. That's great. That's a relic.
Yeah.
So you didn't have a lot of formal schooling, and
no.
And at some point, you, as a teenager, you moved to America.
Yeah, I came here. I landed here on my 16th birthday. And crossing the Atlantic in March. And there were tremendous storms and 40-foot waves.
Wow.
And everybody was sick. In order to overcome my seasickness, I ate 2 big boxes of Whitman sampler chocolate.
Oh, jeez.
They're 5 pounds a piece.
That did the trick.
It did the trick. I wasn't sick at all.
That's a cure for seasickness I've never heard. That's great. Good story.
I started as got a job as a Western Union messenger on Fifth Avenue, 521 Fifth Avenue. They had a Western Union office, and us boys would take around telegrams. And then I was a waiter at the 21 Club in New York. And then I decided I want to go out west, so I bought a Winchester 30-30 rifle and a pair of cowboy boots and a bus ticket to Nebraska.
Nebraska.
Well, I thought Nebraska was, probably the Wild Wild West.
It was west.
Yeah.
How did you get connected with Trungpa Rinpoche?
A friend of mine said to me, I had been reading the Castaneda books, and he said, there's a Tibetan Lama up in Vermont, and he wears bib overalls, drinks Colt 45 malt liquor, and smokes cigarettes. He said, let's go up and see him. So we did. This was Tail of the Tiger, which is now Karmachuling.
Right.
And they had a big army tent, and that's where they gave the teachings. I made an immediate connection with Trungpa Rinpoche. He was paralyzed in his left side because he had an automobile accident and had run his car into a joke shop in Newcastle on Tyne. In England.
In England.
Yeah. So, but he was. There was something about him, his whole presence, his whole aura, that immediately attracted me. I had a personal interview, and he said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "Well, we're having a get-together out in Wyoming. Would you like to go there? It's for 3 months." And I said, "Sure." And so it was the first seminary, 3-month seminary, where we would sit meditation for about 10 hours a day. And then there were also, next would be a week of teachings, Buddhist teachings. And I'd never meditated before, but I used to hunt quite a bit. So I would pretend that I was still hunting. Still hunting, you build a place in a tree and you just sit there very quietly. So that's what I pretended to do. And I got through it.
And you were hunting in your own way?
Yeah. And it's funny because up on the hillside, there you occasionally see an elk or a moose or something like that.
Right. So Trungpa is so known for being unorthodox. And for being, he came up with the term crazy wisdom. Yeah. And what was it like being with him?
When I first started, I figured, if I figure this guy out, I can, he had a lot of ability in magic, and I said, I can grab his magic from him, and, then I'll be sitting pretty. But every time that I thought I had nailed him, everything shifted. He was extraordinarily non-conceptual. I don't know if have you been around people who they see the whole world is different for them. They don't see a tree as a tree, or they do see a tree as a tree. Doesn't matter.
Right.
But the term tree doesn't mean anything. So things just kind of arise. They see energies more, and they're able to see people. And you know, he could look at people and he'd know immediately what they were all about, you know, in 2 or 3 seconds. So he had that ability to do it.
Yes, so
Yeah, and he was very charismatic as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but insightful in a different kind of way.
Our terms was, you know, Rinpoche is acting crazy.
Yeah.
And it was us, we didn't know it, but it was us who were crazy. And he was acting like an enlightened person does, you know.
He was one of the founders of Naropa Institute in
Sure,
Colorado.
yeah.
And Pema Chodron was one of his students, and
yeah,
Allen
Pema.
Ginsberg and Joni Mitchell. I mean, the list
Yeah.
goes on and on.
Yeah.
He was really at the cutting edge of the beginning of the East coming West.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was.
And you were with him for a while.
I lived with him for about 7 years.
Yes.
And we traveled together. I was his servant, you know, because he needed to dress, undress, go to bed,
right.
eat.
You assisted him
Yeah.
with all daily
Sure,
living
yeah.
things, yeah.
Yeah.
And you wrote a book about him.
I did.
And the book is called The Mahasiddha and His Idiot Servant.
Right.
And that was you.
Yeah, I'm the idiot servant.
You were the idiot servant.
And that's because mainly I didn't get it, you know. So, you know, he would say something, and I didn't get it. I didn't get it on the spot. But I gradually, as time went by, then, you know, because of the closeness between us, then he didn't actually have to speak. We had good ESP going back and forth.
Being with someone and having some kind of simpatico
Yeah.
between the two of you, and also the fact that, you know, there is, he certainly has some power.
Yeah.
He certainly had some power, and I'm sure that, you know, you kind of soaked that up as well.
Yeah.
Or it also probably got yours to blossom.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so.
But you had some wild adventures with him.
I did. Well, let's see.
People will have to read the book, actually, to
Yeah,
read
yeah,
some of
okay.
these adventures.
All right.
However, please go right
Well,
ahead.
you know, one of funny things I was thinking about that I would have to take him to the hospital for an examination. And I remember us going into the hospital, and you know, he's obviously Tibetan, and he's stumbling along, holding on to my arm,
Right.
And here am I, and the nurse comes up and she looks at us, and she says to me, "Can he speak English?" So I got it. I got what she saw. She saw this kind of immigrant person.
Yes, right.
So I said to Rinpoche, and I said something like, which means nothing, right? So he turned to me and he said it back to me. And I said to her, he says yes. So we would play. There was a lot of play going on all the time.
Yeah.
We wore uniforms, of course, sometimes.
Now, why did you wear uniforms? What were they uniforms of?
The uniforms were from the Shambhala tradition, but they were Western uniforms. We went to Geeves and Hawkes in London and bought military uniforms. And he bought a general's uniform, and I bought a major's uniform. And the guy said to me, "Who's Mr. Mukpo?" That was Rinpoche's, you know, name on his passport. And I said, "I have no idea." He said, "What are you going to do with these uniforms?" And I said, "I have no idea."
You're just the idiot servant.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the basic thing is that Rinpoche was setting up a mandala in which he could teach. He wanted to establish his home as a court, where students would come in and do specific things, volunteering, but they would have contact with him, and him with them, you know. And we had gardeners and dishwashers and cooks and drivers and housekeepers and valets and all kinds. People would do, you know, spend a couple of hours going to the court and doing things, and a lot of people had uniforms. And when Rinpoche asked me to set up this court, we decided to set it up in the British manner. And I got a copy of Emily Post and Amy Vanderbilt, and you know, we did the whole thing. It was like doing a movie, right?
Yeah.
We had over 150 students coming in per week.
Wow.
And I complained to Rinpoche, and I said, "Oh, there are all these people coming here all the time. I can't turn around, you know." And he said, "That's okay, Johnny." He said, "Let's call it the People's Court." So,
That's great.
yeah, so that's what it was like.
Yeah, he was a renegade, right? I mean, he was.
Well, I had never met anybody like him.
Yeah.
So I can't say whether he was a renegade or not. I think the other teachers, like the big Tibetan teachers, saw him as extraordinary.
Yes.
But also, he got a lot of criticism from the mainstream Buddhist
That's sort of what I mean.
hardliners.
Yeah, right.
You know, they said, "Oh, Trungpa Rinpoche is there in America. He's drinking, smoking, sleeping with ladies. You know, what should we do?"
Yeah, yeah.
Rinpoche had said to me, "You should go out and be a servant." You know, so I couldn't be an ordinary servant, obviously. So I had to be a butler, head of the household. So I had an agency, and they called me. I was up in Nova Scotia, and they said, "We have this job down in New York. We don't know who it is. They won't tell us. Do you want to go for the interview?" And I said, "Sure." So I went down, and they took me to this brownstone in the 60s on the east side. And I went in, and all the staff were African Americans. And they took me up to the sitting room, and down the stairs, smoking a cigar, comes Bill Cosby, right? So he sits opposite me, and you know, we talk back and forth, and he says, "Well, what I want this like a small hotel. You be in charge. I don't want to know about the gas or the electricity. We'll give you money. You just pay all the bills, and I just live here, right?" And I said, "Sure, I can. Can you do that?" And I said, "Sure, I can do that." Then he said, "Well, you know, we have a lot of famous people come to the door. Is that going to fluster you?" And I said, "No, except there's only one person, if they came to the door, I would get flustered." And he said, "Who's that?" And I said, "My mother." He said, "You're hired."
So you got along very well.
Yeah, we had a good time together. We had a really good time together. And it was a big adventure. And I was on the Cosby Show a couple of times.
Were you?
With B.B. King one time, and with Sammy Davis. And I got to meet all these people, wonderful people.
Right. Yeah.
And it was, I had gave a talk to a group of people about service. And somebody said, "Well, what's it like to work with black people?" And I said, "You know, it's real funny." Because he kind of said it in a snide way. And I said, "Well, it's funny. I'm colorblind, you know." And I didn't realize they were black until, you know, somebody pointed it out to me 6 months later. And by then it was too late. I was in love with them.
And you are, for the audience, you are in fact colorblind.
Yeah.
Red-green colorblind.
Yeah, red-green.
There's a little bit different. So, of course, this, you know, the question that comes up, did you have any inkling whatsoever with Bill Cosby of anything that was untoward?
No, I didn't.
Unbelievable.
I didn't. And I was shocked when all this stuff started to come out, you know. And, yeah.
Well, what was that like? Because I would think that, you know, having known him so well, there would be, you know, a disconnect there emotionally to realize that, you know, he was leading this kind of life.
Well, we all have secret lives. So, you know, and I mean, I was always very much considered myself a servant, you know, and even though we had fun together, there was always the etiquette of he's the principal and I'm
Right.
the servant.
That's right.
So, I didn't call him Billy, and he'd call me John or Mr. Perks, actually. That was Mrs. Cosby. She wanted all the staff to call each other Mr. and Miss so-and-so. And they wanted to maintain that kind of thing in the household.
Yes. Yeah. To create the structure.
So I was shocked. I was shocked.
Yeah, was it hard to hear that news?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah, and I was angry at him for a while.
John, you are now practicing Celtic Buddhism.
Yeah.
And I'd love to read this quote because I think
Sure.
it really explains something. And this is something that you said sometime somewhere. I don't know where. And this is the quote. It's still a big question mark as to what Celtic Buddhism is going to evolve into. It's important to make the question mark very big so that it remains a big open question, not only about oneself, but the society in which one lives. Celtic Buddhism could be viewed as an open exploratory adventure with no conclusions.
That's like all our lives, actually. A big explorer adventure with no conclusion. Because you're born and then you do things and then you die. From some point of view, Celtic Buddhism is more scientific. I would call it science art, if you like. I find that if you have a static ceremony that you set up, that it gets too much repetitive and all the life goes out of it. So I like to have the bones of a ceremony and then fill it in depending upon the energies that come up as they arise. Then you deal with it. And that's when magic happens.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a synergistic kind of relationship that you have going on. And I think that you've mentioned this before is your relationship to energies, no matter what you're doing.
Right.
And I think that the word service has come up over and over again in talking about your life.
Yeah.
And so that standpoint, how would you describe that point of view?
Service?
Yes.
Well, it's thinking of others first, obviously. Now, I always had a saying in the early days, when I think about myself, I've got it wrong. When I think about others, I'm hitting the nail on the head. But it actually means, anticipating somebody's needs, talking to them, when people have lots of emotional problems going on all the time. Meditation is really, really good for that, because it first thing you learn in meditation, here I am sitting on the floor on a cushion, and yet my mind is doing all these things. It's off at home, it's doing, having a sexual affair with somebody, it's being angry at somebody, but actually you're just sitting here. So the first thing you realize, that's a number one realization, that the mind is out there and you have to bring it back and center it. That's the beginning of awareness. And then there are lots of other clues along the road. The practice of meditation is in itself a journey. And then you get to be with these deities. You've seen these Tibetan deities,
Yes.
Vajrayogini, different people, Mahakalas, different energies that are actually there, but not there. It's kind of like the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. Yeah. So the whole thing is an adventure, and then you don't take yourself so seriously, because there's no goal, really. We talk about enlightenment, but nobody knows what that is,
And also, you know, the whole notion of reality and,
Yeah.
and how we see that from our own point of view. It also, as you were speaking, it made me think of you with your mother at seances.
Yeah.
You know, and there were entities there,
Sure.
you know, that you could see or not see,
Sure.
and influences that you could see or
Right.
not see. You know, with the stories that you've told, John, today, and the people that you've been engaged in, and we didn't even scratch the surface of,
Right.
of all of your adventures and all the people that you know, I think that you've had a real experience in seeing the arc of a teacher, or seeing the arc of a teaching, or even a lineage.
Right.
Can you say anything about that?
Well, lineage, the lineage of teachers are based on personal relationship between the master and the student, and that's how things get passed down. You know, it's not one of those things where you study and you get a certificate, which is kind of funny. You know, you get a diploma, but you actually have a relationship, an intimate relationship with the teacher. So that's how it's. They call in the Cargill lineage, it's called the ear-whispered lineage, which means that a lot of the teachings are not verbal. They're non-verbal teachings. That's really interesting. You know. So I think that the exciting thing is, in terms of education, is that we're almost just beginning to learn about the teacher-student relationship. And of course, there's a lot of problems with sexuality, and people taking advantage one way or another. So, but if we can talk about those things, that's great. Not that we can solve them, but we are aware that they exist.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's come up in a lot of the places in your life, too, with the people that you've been dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How do you see your place in all this? We were talking about lineage, and I understand, I think that what you said actually about being able to relate to someone in a nonverbal way. You're really getting more to the essence of who the person is.
Yeah.
And your relationship with Rinpoche was certainly like that.
Yeah.
When you talk about a Celtic Buddhist lineage,
Yeah.
where do you see yourself in that?
As a servant, that's it. I think pretty much just that is. It's a yogic lineage, so it means I don't have a big group of students that I sit up there and give talks to. I have students who, a lot of them don't know each other. They don't even know that you know, they're my students. The individuals do. But they come and go, you know, they come and go. Some stay with me for a year, some 6 months, some come and go on weekends. So, you know, I arrange it that way, and that's how I teach. And they go out, they have their own livelihood, you know. We have people who are vets, who are a doctor, or, you know, a plumber, or different
all kinds of different people.
Things. Yeah, monks. We have a monastic section also, and they work with people. You know, it's pretty simple.
It's pretty simple. That's a good place to end.
Yeah.
The whole thing is pretty darn simple. Huh?
Okay.
Yeah. Wonderful stories, and there are so many more.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're more than welcome, as we say, as us Americans say.
Us Americans, yes. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Great.
Thanks to all of you for joining us for a really interesting show today. Again, we are a weekly show. You can tune in anytime. And we look forward to seeing you next week.